15 Minutes That Matter, a webinar series produced by Skipping Stone. Hello, I am Rebecca Kelly, Director of Marketing for Skipping Stone, and today we have a featured speaker, John Brown VI, who's our Skipping Stone partner. John, before we get started, I wanted to see if there's some metrics, people downloading your Avoiding the Technology Trap white paper. But before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hey, thanks, Rebecca. It's my pleasure to be here today. And I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to have a dialogue around a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So in terms of my background, I have over 25 years of experience starting, running, and growing energy software and consulting firms, and as an individual contributor on the consulting side. My consulting focus has been around management consulting and then mid to large scale software selection, implementation, and optimization engagements. Primarily this has been in the energy and the commodity sectors, but I've also worked in transportation, chemical, and other verticals as well. Thanks.
Thank you, John. We're looking at the chat room session. Those of you who are listening, please feel free to chat with us. Your questions are greatly appreciated. John, let's start with what exactly is the technology trap?
Okay. Well, the idea of the technology trap came about here at Skipping Stone as we began to analyze all the different software technology engagements which we've worked with our clients over the years, and looking at those in terms of what drove the success of those engagements. So what we've seen is clients will have one or more issues they want to resolve, and they think technology is going to solve those issues. So at that point, they may have a variety of technological pain points. Maybe they have a million spreadsheets that their users are all playing with. Maybe they're having trouble reconciling their numbers, maybe month-end close difficulties. They might be supporting multiple systems with redundancies, and maybe the business is expanding and the old systems just can't keep up with it. So their typical response is to say, hey, let's invest in a new system that will solve our issues. So everybody jumps on that train and they take off. Now they bring the technology in-house, they may start the implementation, and they're running full steam ahead. But unfortunately, they haven't generally laid the proper groundwork, and at some point, that engagement is going to come off the rails. So if you're lucky, it derails quickly, but often it's not the case. People get really deep into the effort. They start to realize, hey, there's significant issues here. People start to see the technology isn't going to solve all their issues, and it may not even be the right solution. For example, the difficulties with the month-end close may be driven more from a process gap than it is from a technology gap. Or maybe your commodity schedulers want to stick with their spreadsheets and not even use the new system. By the time this occurs, you will have expended a great deal of time and effort and probably money. And there's a lot of organizational reluctance around doing what you need to do to correct the course. So at that point, that's what we define as being caught in the technology trap.
So let's look at the big picture. How can companies truly avoid this trap?
First thing is to recognize there are three critical dimensions to the solution: people, processes, and technology. And they need to be addressed in that order. So people first, processes second, and then you can tackle the technology. So the first step, the people step, is to assess the team. Do you have the right people? Do you have enough people? Are your people well trained? Do they have management support? And are they empowered to perform the functions that you need them to perform? If not, you need to act to correct that situation. And in addition, I had a discussion with a colleague of mine in the Atlanta office here, Ross Malmay, the other day, and he brought up a really good point, and that is you need to also look at this not just from where you are today, but where you're going in the future. So you want to make sure that you have the people and quality of people and the quantity of people you need today, but also a plan for how you're going to meet the needs as you grow in your organization and as you bring on new technology. So you're planning for today and into the future. Next, you can move on to your processes. Make sure that your current processes are documented. People are well trained on them. Then make sure that you're enforcing that people actually adopt them. I see a lot of people who have processes well documented, but nobody's paying any attention to them. So you need to enforce that part of it. And finally, you need to monitor those processes, work to improve them, and fill in any gaps that you may have in those processes. Now, at that point, you're ready for the technology side. And I could spend really a couple hours talking about what you need to do on a technology side, but let's just take it up at a high level and just to raise a couple points. First, have you defined and documented your business objectives? And now we already did our processes in the previous step, so now we also want to look at our requirements. Have you documented the requirements in sufficient detail to support those business processes? And if so, do all the stakeholders, and this includes any vendors or consultants involved, do they understand and accept those requirements? If not, you need to take an action there. And have you identified specific and measurable success criteria to meet your business objectives on this engagement for technology? And if so, then you need to make sure you have proper project governance and are adhering to general best practices around implementations. And at Skipping Stone, one of the things we recommend is to put on an independent quality review, or as IQR as we call it. And this is to identify risks and develop mitigation strategies. The IQR, again, the key thing there is an independent party that would come in preferably at the beginning of the engagement and make sure the project is set up and off the right start, and then it predefines touch points throughout the engagement to make sure things are still on track, and again, identifying those risks, developing mitigation strategies. And finally, recognize that you're just not going to get everything done that you want to on this project. Something's going to have to give. And so you want to make sure you're logging all those items and creating a roadmap for future enhancements.
John, I was hoping you could keep this simple. This sounds a little bit overwhelming.
This is where the fun starts. So things don't always go according to plan as well. So it sounds complicated. It's really actually not that bad. But then again, as I mentioned, things don't always go the way you want them to either. So sometimes you may find yourself in the middle of an implementation, and realistically, you can't just completely stop and go back to the beginning and start all over again. But you can't use that, or you shouldn't use that as an excuse either. You must be really honest with yourself and recognize that some actions need to be taken if you want to be successful. So it helps to realize that what we're talking about here is not a one-size-fits-all solution or an all-or-nothing approach or cookie cutter. There are a few basic steps you can take that will pay large dividends, and the first thing you need to do is to assess really where you are. So at Skipping Stone, we use an interactive checklist to help our clients with this assessment, map out their next steps, and then we map out an action plan to address the more critical items on that list to get them moving again and back on track. And I can't stress that brutally honest part enough. I see too many organizations that use the fact that they're in the middle of an implementation as an excuse not to take any action. If you don't recognize and address the gaps in your implementation, and the earlier the better, at some point you're going to have a problem.
John, we've got a question that came in. Are there some standard processes or templates that can make this type of initiative easier to manage?
Well, certainly. So I mentioned checklists before, but at Skipping Stone we have actually what we call a series of facilitated checklists, and these target areas such as implementation readiness, but the organization, the project itself, system assessments, the implementation quality reviews, I said, and some others as well. Now, these are not just check-a-box, get-an-answer type of tools, but they're part of a discussion we facilitate with our client stakeholders to create the action plans and risk mitigations. The first step is usually a 1 to 2 day workshop where we perform a high-level assessment resulting in a company-specific action plan and company-specific, engagement-specific action plan. Skipping Stone also has a set of templates used to accelerate activities throughout the engagement, such as requirements definition, quality control, process mapping, and other activities. So it helps jumpstart things and simplify it for the client.
John, a question came in. How can you tell if your company is prone to traps? Or to keep it simple, what signs do you actually look for?
Yeah, so there are a variety of warning signs, or let's say red flags. So we can look for these red flags in each of the 3 critical components. So the first red flag is we're not looking at 3 critical components. We're only looking at one dimension. So again, you have to look independently and in concert at all 3 of the people, processes, and technology dimensions. So on the people side, these red flags might include things like people performing double duty, particularly in a mission-critical activity. Resource bottlenecks are another warning sign. People people are making comments like, well, I have to wait for Mary in scheduling before I can do my part, or Phil in accounting is holding me up, I can't get my numbers out. Those are warning signs or red flags. Errors are another red flag, and errors can be a little bit tough because the root cause could be people, could be processes, could be technology, and sometimes it's a combination. Now, most of the time it'll be clear which dimension is the culprit, but there will be times when you need to take a deeper look to ensure you're solving the right problem. And that's true really across all the warning signs. They really can fall into different buckets and sometimes multiple buckets. On the process side, warning signs or red flags include things such as inefficiencies, a lot of rework in the organization, and the inability to grow or scale with the business. On the technology side, you want to watch out for where people are performing work outside the system. Sometimes people put in a technology to kill spreadsheets, and they end up with more spreadsheets at the end than they started with. Manual workarounds are another red flag, and then not being able to produce a necessary metric is a red flag. I've seen more than one company that couldn't consistently produce, say, accurate margin reports for their trading books, and of course the classic example is not being able to report risk metrics across commodities and business lines. That's kind of a difficult one, but it's still, if you can't do it, that's a warning sign you need to address. As I said before, the root cause can sometimes cross dimensions. So at Skipping Stone, we have a comprehensive list of red flags or warning signs and put them against all the dimensions. For example, manual workarounds can be caused by people not knowing how to do something, could be related to process gaps or people not following processes, could also be a gap in the technology. Maybe the system just doesn't perform calculation X that your CEO wants to see. So those are some of the red flags or warning signs that we look at.
Sure. Okay, so why people first?
Sounds like a cliche, right?
Yeah.
Well, everybody talks about how important their people are. Our people are our greatest asset. I think every company says that, et cetera. But people really are the foundational component. Of course, you really need all three. You need people, processes, and technology to be squared away, but it starts with those people. And if you have the right people, and they have the quality and the quantity, the right people in the organization, you can get away with less optimal processes and technology. Having great people can really overcome a lot of obstacles and make up for gaps in other areas. Now, I don't really recommend that solution. I think you really need to address all of them, but people is really where it starts.
All right, we're running out of time. We got about 3 minutes left, John. What would you recommend as a first step for any company to take?
Well, I sort of alluded to this before. I think they're really, you said first step, but so the very first one I would say is looking at doing a 1 to 2 day workshop to assess current state or situation at a high level and map out appropriate next steps for your specific requirements. Now, preferably that's done before you're too far into the implementation. It should be done up front, but it can be done mid-implementation as well. You'll come out of that workshop with a clear action plan that you can execute to help move things along. And then the other thing I mentioned previously is the independent quality reviews. I think I've just seen them pay really great dividends on projects throughout my career ever since I started doing them or seeing actually other consultants do them as well.
All right, that sounds, we've got some other questions, but we will take those directly. If you could email John on the follow-up, we're hoping that you participate in the survey that will follow this webinar. Thank you, John, for joining us, and we appreciate all of our listeners. Thank you very much for signing in, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next program of 15 Minutes That Matter.
Hey, thanks, everyone.